What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. We have Justin Gaethje, 22 wins and 3 losses, taking on Michael Chandler, 22 wins and 6 losses. This is a battle at the lightweight division at UFC 268. This is like the third fight down, tremendous pay-per-view card. It's taking place at Madison Square Garden on November 6th. And Justin Gaethje is currently the number 2 ranked lightweight contender, whereas Michael Chandler is the number 4 ranked lightweight contender. Just make this fight happen. I don't want any cancellations, injuries, COVID positive tests, nothing like that. This is such an exciting matchup. And it's basically because you have two extremely athletic lightweights, 155, and both of these guys can absolutely crack. Now, this is Justin Gaethje's first fight since losing in his title challenge versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. This was at UFC 254. This was October of 2020. So it will have been over a year by the time Justin Gaethje returns to the cage. And in that title challenge, which was Khabib's final fight, at least to this point, it didn't go well for Gaethje. I mean, he was competitive in the first round, but, Khabib was surprisingly competitive in the stand-up before even taking the fight to the ground. So, by the second round, Khabib just pretty much just wrapped him up in a blanket and just, rocked him to bed. And he actually choked him out with that triangle choke to where Gaethje was unconscious by the end of the fight. Gaethje didn't take a tremendous beating. Again, it was a technical, interesting stand-up fight where Gaethje was clearly looking to land some heavy leg kicks to compromise Khabib's movement and ability to shoot and take Gaethje down. And, Khabib was returning fire, catching Gaethje up top with several shots. So very interesting first round, and Khabib basically just bled Gaethje's gas tank dry and eventually just pressured him and choked him out. But, before that Khabib Nurmagomedov fight for Justin Gaethje, he had made his debut in the UFC in 2017. This is after he was shining in the World Series of Fighting. He was like the lightweight champion and defended it like 4 times successfully. And then he goes to the UFC. He beats former, pretty high-ranked contender. And somebody who's beaten Tony Ferguson when Ferguson was still young. Michael Johnson, that's who Gaethje made his debut against, stopped him with, punches and knees. This was like in the second round. And then Gaethje loses to Eddie Alvarez via a knee. He was knocked out. And, Eddie Alvarez is obviously a former champion. And then after that Gaethje versus Eddie Alvarez fight, he takes on Dustin Poirier, currently like the uncrowned champion at lightweight after beating Conor McGregor twice, beating Dan Hooker just before that, and having his title challenge, unsuccessful title challenge versus Khabib just before that, which, if you lose to Khabib and Khabib's retired, I almost feel like everybody who fought Khabib, Conor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, they all get that Khabib mulligan because nobody figured that puzzle out. But Justin Gaethje, when he fought Dustin Poirier, this is April of 2018, this is one of the greatest and most action-packed and just brutal fights that you will see in UFC history. This was a fight night main event, so this was scheduled for 5, and when I say that this was a back and forth fight and a battle of attrition, that doesn't even begin to really describe these guys' threshold for pain in this fight. And Justin Gaethje was rocking, just destroying Dustin Poirier's leg with those leg kicks. And again, for as good and well-rounded as Dustin Poirier has become over the years, and Dustin Poirier can crack, but Dustin Poirier can't crack quite as hard as Gaethje appears to be cracking. But in Poirier versus Gaethje, I kid you not, go rewatch that fight. They basically just battle it out through 3. It's like anybody's guess who's winning. We don't know who's going to be able to hold on by the end of this thing. And Poirier, you could see Gaethje start to tire and start to wilt. And, his gas tank ended up kind of becoming a story because of how he wilted in the 4th round in this fight versus Poirier. Well, as Poirier said after this last win against Conor McGregor in their 3rd fight, he's just willing to suffer more. Dustin Poirier is just as tough as they come. And Gaethje is tough as hell too. And again, this fight between the two will say it all. But Dustin Poirier stopped Justin Gaethje in the 4th round via TKO, just a flurry of punches. Justin Gaethje could barely stand by the end of this thing. I mean, it was brutal. It was up there, in my opinion, with like Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero too. Just one of those classics. At the time, it was kind of unheralded as a classic because, you know, Poirier wasn't quite where he's become today, and Justin Gaethje hadn't yet just smashed Tony Ferguson over the course of almost 5 whole rounds. But this was a sensational fight night main event. So after that loss to Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje just goes on a crazy tear. He, you know, links up with Trevor Whitman. So Trevor Whitman is helping to refine Gaethje's, you know, stand-up game, where he's not taking as much punishment. Even though he could take the punishment, he's not getting hit unnecessarily, because whereas Gaethje's offensive game is as deadly as they come, his defensive game wasn't totally shored up. He didn't see the need for a lot of like head movement and, you know, and basically changing the angle so you could get out of harm's way after you let 1 or 2 punches go. Well, Trevor Whitman has helped clean up a lot of Gaethje's stand-up game. And keep in mind, Gaethje's background is that of a wrestler. You would just never know it watching his UFC fights, aside from maybe his takedown defense, but he doesn't use offensive wrestling. He stands up and bangs, which is, you know, pretty much par for the course for a lot of wrestlers. I mean, Rampage Jackson, even Daniel Cormier, John Jones, when fighters start getting into their 30s, early, mid-30s, they stop wrestling because it's just so damn exhausting minute by minute. I mean, some of the most legendary strikers in UFC history have wrestling backgrounds, you know what I mean? But in this tear for Justin Gaethje, it was a 3-fight win streak. He beat James Vick via knockout, and this is before, you know, James Vick had totally hit a cliff. I mean, James Vick, his career is all but over, and his degradation in abilities it looks like the fight game is worn on him. I mean, he had holes in his game, but I mean, knockouts will definitely cut your career short if you just can't be competitive chin-wise. And, you know, Justin Gaethje was one of the first to test that for James Vick. Knocked him out, and then he knocked Edson Barboza out cold. And he knocked him out in the first. I mean, he knocked James Vick out in the first too. But he knocks Edson Barboza out in the first round, and then he fights Cowboy Cerrone. And this is before Cerrone, you know, hit this recent cliff of like, you know, several losses in a row. Even though this loss to Justin Gaethje was one of those losses in a row. But, you know, at the time they made Gaethje versus Cowboy Cerrone, it was thought to be a pretty competitive fight. Well, I mean, it was interesting from a kickboxing standpoint when it did last, but it didn't go a whole round. Justin Gaethje knocked Donald Cowboy Cerrone out in the first round. I mean, you could argue it was a little bit of an early stoppage, but no. You look at the way that Cerrone was reacting to the punches, dropping to a knee, then getting clipped again, like he was about to have his lights put out because, again, Justin Gaethje has special power in his hands. So after that win over Donald Cowboy Cerrone, Justin Gaethje takes on Tony Ferguson, who, it's just unfortunate we never got to see Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov when they were both in their prime. Out of the 4 times, at least 4 times they tried to make the fight and actually scheduled it, the one that was the most heartbreaking was not the last one, not the COVID era cancellation, but the one before that, and not the one 2 times before that where, you know, Khabib after the weigh-in basically has to be taken to the hospital because he's having like weight drained issues and has to be on IVs, and it was an emergency. Not that cancellation, but the cancellation between that and the COVID era one, which was when Tony Ferguson was at a press event, stepped on like a wire, tore his knee, several ligaments. I mean, it was gruesome. And so it was crushing when that fight was canceled because you then replaced Tony Ferguson first with Max Holloway, but he couldn't lose the weight fast enough to hit 155, which is interesting because he fights at 145. But, you know, a lot of these guys drain a lot of weight to make weight for their respective weight classes. But Max Holloway couldn't fill in for Tony Ferguson, and so Al Iaquinta ended up filling in for Ferguson and Holloway and actually taking Khabib Nurmagomedov the whole 5 rounds. Well, fast forward a couple of years, you have Tony Ferguson after the fight with him versus Khabib in the last attempt to get that fight together was canceled. They then bring fights back after the, you know, relatively short compared to other sports shutdown for the UFC. Tony Ferguson takes on Justin Gaethje. Tony Ferguson was kind of like the fan favorite for years in this division. Like, it was always a question of, like, who's the best in the division? Is it Tony Ferguson? Is it Khabib? Is it, Conor McGregor? And, we never got two of the great matches that we wanted to get with Tony Ferguson. I wanted to see him fight Conor and Khabib. But Tony Ferguson takes on Justin Gaethje going into the fight. Even though Gaethje was the underdog, I actually picked Gaethje to win it because I felt that after, the layoff plus age, he was in his mid-30s by then, he being Ferguson, plus like the knee injury, nasty knee injury, which he came back from to his credit and beat like Showtime Pettis, Cowboy Cerrone. Only a Tony Ferguson could come back so quickly from such a knee injury and start performing. But I feel like he had lost a step, that he never recovered after that point. And against Justin Gaethje, he just seemed a step slow for all of the exchanges. But to Gaethje's credit, he boxed and kickboxed brilliantly against Tony Ferguson. Made him pay for any time he tried to get into the pocket. Tony Ferguson has this like awkward pressure style where it's high volume, a lot of movement, but a lot of coming in and trying to hit you with an elbow, a punch, a weird kick, all kinds of things. And Justin Gaethje was having none of it. And this was to no crowd, so you could hear the smack, the thud of these punches just way louder than normal. So you just hear Justin Gaethje's punches splashing so cleanly on Tony Ferguson that I don't know how Ferguson was able to survive 4 rounds of that brutal, career-altering beating that he absorbed at the hands of Justin Gaethje. But he made it into the 5th round and, finally like a jab hit him, and I don't know if he was checking to see if his nose was still there, but he just kind of stumbled awkwardly. It was a very jarring scene watching Tony Ferguson take that type of a beat down, but he just stumbles back into the cage, and then, the ref finally mercifully stops the fight for Tony Ferguson. Tremendous TKO win for Justin Gaethje. That's what earned him the title shot versus Khabib. So that's the whole thing. Tony was about to have a 5th attempt at a Khabib fight if he could get past Justin Gaethje. But it just wasn't meant to be. Justin Gaethje gets the attempt against Khabib. It doesn't go well. And here we are, more than a year later, Justin Gaethje is returning to the cage to take on Michael Chandler, the former 3-time Bellator lightweight champion who has only had 2 fights now in the UFC. He's in his mid-30s. He's, again, wrestler by trade, but somebody who can absolutely hammer. He scores many of his wins via knockout. And his last fight in Bellator, before switching to the UFC, was a knockout win over Ben Henderson. And then Chandler took on Dan Hooker, which was just a very interesting matchup. I was glad that they made it because there was a question of who are they going to pair Chandler up against, because it's clear that, he's on the clock. He's in his mid-30s. He has no time to waste. He wants to find out how great he can be in the biggest MMA organization there is. And his first challenge came against Dan Hooker, who a lot of people thought, because we had seen how evenly Dan Hooker fought a 5-round fight versus Dustin Poirier. We've seen Dan Hooker knock out a much younger and more inexperienced Gilbert Burns, but we saw Dan Hooker pretty much dominate and easily beat Al Iaquinta, former title challenger. So Michael Chandler takes on Dan Hooker, and it's an interesting fight. Dan Hooker's moving around. He's the much longer, taller, rangier fighter, and he's kind of kickboxing, but you can see that Michael Chandler is investing to the body early, and then at a certain point, he pulls the trigger up high. It wasn't the first time he attempted to go for the home run after, whacking Hooker a couple times to the body, but there was one time where he went up top, clipped Hooker cleanly, dropped him, finished him with the punches afterwards. Beautiful TKO victory in Michael Chandler's UFC debut. It was just one of those coming out parties where it just had the MMA world thrilled to have Michael Chandler in the UFC. And that's actually why, after beating Hooker, Chandler was able to challenge for the vacant lightweight championship, which Dustin Poirier had foregone to fight Conor McGregor a 2nd and 3rd time. So there was this vacant title, which most people thought and viewed Dustin Poirier as the rightful champion in the division. But the vacant title bout officially was between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler, again, hot off that TKO knockout over Dan Hooker. And Chandler, almost stopped Charles Oliveira in the first round. He hurt him badly to where, Charles Oliveira was trying to desperately try to grab a leg and fell forward. So now he's on all fours and, on his knees, and Michael Chandler is just whacking him. And it's like, okay, which one of these is going to be the one that puts him out? Or when is the ref just going to come in and wave the fight off? There were like 2 or 3 moments in that first round between Oliveira and Chandler where you thought Chandler's about to be the lightweight champion. Well, Oliveira survived that first round, and like within the first 20 seconds of the second round, he throws a right hand, follows it up with a left hook, clips Chandler, drops him with the left hook. Chandler's now, scrambling to survive, gets caught again, staggers back into the cage, gets caught again because he's trying to move along the fence line. Oliveira sees where he's moving, catches him, kind of intercepts him with one final left hook that drops Chandler, and then he finishes him with the final punches. Referee stops in. TKO win for Charles Oliveira, who is now currently the lightweight champion of the division. Nobody could see this one coming. Well, this is Michael Chandler's first fight back since that TKO loss to Oliveira, which just took place in May. So we're in October now. So we're about 5 months removed from that by the time he gets into the cage. So we have 2 guys on a 1-fight losing streak. One hasn't seen action in over a year, the other one in just under a half a year. So what do I expect between Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler? Well, hell, I expect fireworks for as long as this thing lasts. Well, here's the question though. Besides Khabib Nurmagomedov, who again, nobody has escaped the takedowns and the wrath of Khabib, Justin Gaethje was no exception. But aside from Khabib, we haven't seen anybody take Gaethje down and just keep him down. Did Alvarez might have taken him down once or twice? No. So, all this is to say that Justin Gaethje has great takedown defense. Again, his defensive wrestling is really solid, but he doesn't use his offensive wrestling. Michael Chandler, if he gets involved in a shootout and he wants to change the complexion of the fight, he has gone to takedowns and he won a title, one of his 3, Bellator lightweight title wins against Brent Primus by taking him down, keeping him down, winning the round, and doing that in multiple rounds to then win a 5-round fight. Well, this one is scheduled for 3 rounds, non-title fight. So who is going to take the first round in this one? And is it going to go beyond the first round? Well, Justin Gaethje, we've seen him lose via stoppage, knockout TKO. But in the fight against Eddie Alvarez, it took place in the 3rd round. And against Dustin Poirier, it took place in the 4th round. So I wouldn't consider Justin Gaethje to be chinny. And again, his defense has improved. Now, this is 5'10" Gaethje, 5'10" versus 5'8" Michael Chandler, although Michael Chandler has a 1-inch reach advantage, at least measurement-wise, 71-inch reach to 70-inch reach. So I wouldn't consider Gaethje chinny. Chandler, I would say he's more chinny than Justin Gaethje. I can't see Charles Oliveira, I don't know this, but I can't picture him just dropping Justin Gaethje with punches. If anything, if they were to fight, I would probably favor Justin Gaethje to drop and maybe stop Charles Oliveira. I think that highly of Justin Gaethje, even with those, back-to-back losses to Alvarez and Poirier like 5 fights ago. Under the tutelage of Trevor Whitman, and assuming that Justin Gaethje is still all the way locked in. Certain losses could do certain things to certain fighters. I don't know if he's 100% psychologically recovered from, being beaten in the way that he was beaten by Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, Chandler doesn't present the same challenges that Khabib presents, but after you climb the mountain, it takes a special person to get knocked down and then start, get back to that place again. If Justin Gaethje is still all in, committed, still listening to his training, still adhering to instruction, I think that this is a very winnable fight for him. I think that he could knock Michael Chandler out. Now, I also think there's a chance that Michael Chandler can hit and hurt potentially stop Justin Gaethje. No doubt, that can happen. And Michael Chandler, I think, is the more likely out of the two to initiate a takedown and bring the fight to the ground. Will he need to? Will he want to? And if he wants to, why? Is it because something's not going right in the stand-up? I expect Justin Gaethje to work some leg kicks in on Michael Chandler and to back up when Michael Chandler tries to collapse the pocket. Since he's a little bit shorter, Michael Chandler has to sort of ambush, step back, and then come in with 2 or 3 punches, maybe a kick as well. I expect Gaethje to try to tame Chandler a bit with the leg kicks, and then I expect him to start opening up and boxing him up top and trying to catch him cleanly. Now, if he catches him cleanly with like the left hook or the straight right, especially that left hook that follows up the straight right, and again, it was a left hook from Oliveira that dropped and ultimately stopped Michael Chandler, I could see Gaethje's left hook being a big problem because he throws it at the end of a combination. Like he'll throw a deadly right hand and then follow that up with a nasty left hook. And, Chandler does many of the same things. I just see Chandler get landed on with the clean power punch more than I've seen Gaethje, at least in recent fights, get landed on cleanly with that punch. So if I had to pick the most likely outcome, I think I'm going Justin Gaethje via stoppage or knockout. I've got a really good friend whose opinion I respect a lot, who's actually going Michael Chandler on this one. But I am going Justin Gaethje. I'll say second round TKO, KO. And, that would be kind of interesting, right? Because that would be 2 consecutive second round TKO losses for Michael Chandler. And, this is pretty much Michael Chandler, his last shot. Like, not if he wants to stick around until he's like 38 or 40 years old. He can stick around and maybe try to get back to the spot. But he sounded like he was on a short timetable in seeing if he could become UFC champion. Again, he's 35 right now. Justin Gaethje's 32. If Justin Gaethje is as locked in and motivated, again, as he was when he was going into the Tony Ferguson fight, into the Cowboy fight before that, or even into the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight, obviously, for the title, if he's still that Justin Gaethje, I think that he's going to beat Michael Chandler via second round stoppage. If this was a 5-rounder, I might think a little bit differently because I could envision a scenario where Michael Chandler drains Justin Gaethje's energy and is able to stick around to the 3rd or 4th round and then stop him late. But because this is a 3-rounder, or at least I think it's a 3-rounder, it's not the main event, it's not the co-main, it's not for any title. I don't know why else they would make it they've done weird things lately with that, but I think it's a 3-rounder. But yeah, I am going Justin Gaethje via stoppage. But yeah, let me know what you think about Gaethje versus Chandler. Again, this is just a hell of a fight to make. It just sounds so violent. Just hearing the names, I think this is gonna be a pretty violent affair. But if Justin Gaethje wins or if Michael Chandler wins, how do you see the lightweight division unfolding? Poirier, again, just beat Conor McGregor in their 3rd fight, their trilogy rubber match. Poirier is about to challenge for Charles Oliveira's title. Should Justin Gaethje or Michael Chandler, if they win this fight, be the next in line to challenge for that title? Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.